Hi there, and welcome to our first week of Advent. Every week during the season of Advent, I will be posting a video that is associated with an Advent devotional. Each week, the written portion of the Advent devotional is going to be shared in a link in our weekly e-blast, our weekly email. If you need to sign up for that weekly email, there's a way to do that on our website, stmatthewsva.org. I invite you to sign up for that if you haven't already. The link will take you to the written devotional, but I'll also be reading through the devotional here. For those of you that like to just sit and ponder things, there are some folks who like to journal and write. The written portion of the devotional offers space for that, as well as meditative coloring. So if that's something you enjoy doing, I invite you to print that out each week. If you need a copy sent to you, don't be afraid to contact the church office and we will make sure you get a copy in the mail. To start off, I'd like to introduce the devotional that we're going to be reading through over the next 4 weeks. The title is In Light and Darkness. It's an illustrated devotional by Illustrated Ministry. In Light and Darkness, the inspiration for this theme comes from the common usage of light and darkness during Advent. Now, Scripture focusing on God's light has led to the belief that light is the source of goodness and hope. And this belief sometimes implies that darkness is not wanted or needed. It is something to banish or get rid of, or God is not even present in the dark. Now, Barbara Brown Taylor, maybe you've heard of her, she wrote a book called Learning to Walk in the Dark. And this book helps us reimagine our understanding of darkness, primarily how Christianity heavily relies on this binary construct of light as good and darkness as bad. Now, Barbara Brown Taylor, she proposes the pair of light and dark exist together in balance, not opposition. She asks, what can light possibly mean without dark? We're going to explore these questions over the next 4 weeks, so grab a pen, some crayons or colored pencils, start working through your In Light and Darkness Advent devotional, and we hope you enjoy this time to ponder these questions. Today's devotional starts with a scripture passage from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. We read this scripture on Christmas Eve every year, so hopefully it rings a bell. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. What is the night sky like where we live? How would you describe it? We're kind of near a city, but we're technically a suburb, but a very large suburb at that. What are the street lights like? How do they compare with starlight? And have we ever gone to a place different than where we usually are, looking up into the night sky and being amazed by how many or how few stars we might see compared to where we live, just based on that change of setting? We often use competitive language around ideas of light and darkness, maybe assuming that since they're opposites, they must be at odds with one another. The idea that light and darkness are in competition, the light shines, the darkness does not overcome it, is a common but not automatic understanding. The darkness not overcoming the light doesn't have to mean that the light wins. It could mean there's simply not a fight to be had. Like stars in the night sky, the light and the darkness, they coexist, each helping create space for and defining the other. They are part of the same world. They make each other visible and knowable. Without that dark sky, how would we see the stars shine? Without their shining, how could we guess at the scope of the sky? About 100 years ago, the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke, I think that's how you say that, sorry if I messed that up, maybe while looking up at a starry sky, wrote, "The dark embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me. People, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me." The darkness invites our imagination to play. The darkness is what existed with God, that great presence just stirring at the beginning of creation. It's the canvas onto which the whole world came into being. It's what welcomed the waters, the land, the sky, every living thing, and first of all, before anything else, the light. The darkness is still what holds all that is. Maybe, as the poet imagines, in an embrace. Each night as the light fades and the world falls into rest again. And instead of a birth narrative for Jesus, like found in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, the Gospel of John gives us this: a call back to the very beginning of our faith's story, to that initial darkness that covers the face of the deep, and to the light that comes when God speaks it into being. This light, a light that exists before the sun or the stars, is the first thing God calls good. Now, the Gospel of John draws us back there at the beginning of this narrative, as if to say, remember how world-changing our story says the light was? Remember how it shaped all that could be? Our ancestors, the people John's writing to, and those long before and long after that would have known a longer, deeper darkness than we ever experienced. They would have experienced the return of light as what made it possible for them to see and navigate the world around them, to know themselves and each other, and to play, work, learn, and discover. That's who Jesus, the Word made flesh, is. Nothing will be the same after him. Everything that's possible, life and abundant life, only is so because of him. This Advent, let's consider the suggestion of Genesis and John, that the darkness is what it is, and the light is what comes. We are rooted in the first, and we wait for the second. Our lives find meaning through them both. So now there are some questions that I would like you to explore, questions for you to discuss with someone you're with or to journal about if you've printed out this devotional. Those questions are, what do you notice in the night? What is something that stirs in you in the nighttime? And when have you relied on light shining in the darkness? Feel free to pause this video and journal about those few questions, or keep going until there's a question that really sparks your interest. What do you imagine in the darkness? Does your imagination work differently there than it does in the light? What are some consequences of thinking about light and dark as in competition with one another? This question had me thinking a little bit about how, children are sometimes afraid of the dark and even adults sometimes are afraid of the dark because there's this unknown about it. We don't know what's there in the darkness, and we fear it. We can fear it at times. I know when I go camping and I hear a little bit of a rustling sound in the woods, every once in a while that makes me a little nervous. But in reality, most of the time, it's just nature. It's just God. It's just creation there and present. So to me, thinking about light and dark as in competition with one another, it's this idea that the fear comes in with the dark. Now, in what ways might darkness be a place of possibility? This one really had me thinking because I often like to sit in my backyard, or like I said, when I like to go camping, I just like to sit there in the silence. Nobody needs to say a word. And even if the fire is burning just down to embers, sometimes that darkness is a place where I can just contemplate, where I can just be calm, where I can just be centered and not be worrying about the world and all the things I have to do tomorrow or things that are stressing me out. To me, it can really be a place of calm, even though at times I fear it. So that's a really interesting juxtaposition for me and something that I'm going to be contemplating over the next couple of weeks. I hope you enjoyed listening to some of these questions. I hope you're journaling about them. Maybe you're coloring in your Advent devotional. Please don't be afraid to comment about this video, comment on the things that you found interesting about this devotional this week, ideas that you want to share with your neighbors and with our community. You can comment on the video. I hope you enjoy, and we will see you next week.